Chapter 4. More Terror. As soon as I left, I tried to figure out a way to get out of the paper route. I was scared, needed to survive, and didn't intend to ever go anywhere near Larry Creep's house. Time played a cruel trick on me that week. It was like sitting in school watching the clock, only to have it stand still until the end of the school day. And then time flew by so fast, like a blur, when I walked out the door. The week after that awful Wednesday, time behaved like it was after school. The week flew by because I didn't want it to, and I became more afraid and trapped as the upcoming Wednesday approached. Tuesday night, I laid in bed sweating because I'd been unable to think of a way to avoid the morning encounter with Larry. Then it came to me. A simple plan that I laughed at myself for not thinking of sooner. I must have drifted off to sleep because the next thing I knew, the sound of the paper truck woke me up. The driver yelled our home address, and a man in the back rattled up the truck's metal cargo door and jumped out. He dragged the bale of papers up our steps and heaved it onto the porch, which landed with a boom. The unloader clumped back down the stairs, hopped on the truck, and pulled down the cargo door as the truck sped off, gears grinding. I stayed in bed a little longer until my father's alarm clock went off, and he came to the bedroom door after a few minutes. "You up?"
Yes.
I said, and asked him to please cut the wire for me. I could hardly breathe as I waited for him to leave the house. I kept telling myself that all I had to do was hide the papers and everything would be fine. It's not like people look forward to a newspaper full of ads. I dressed slowly and didn't leave my room until I heard my father walk out of the house. Then I walked to the front door and looked out onto the porch, and Dad didn't cut the wire again. I sat down next to the papers, trembling. My plan didn't seem so simple anymore. Where to hide them? I had to decide because it was getting light. Under the porch? No. Somebody might find them there. In the sewers? No. Bush and I had tried lifting a sewer hole cover a few weeks ago, and the two of us couldn't budge it. I couldn't do it alone. Finally, it hit me. The garbage cans in the alley. No one would notice them there. I tried to lift the bundle, but it was too heavy. I pushed it to the edge of the porch and gave one more shove. The pile tipped, rolled down the 5 steps, and landed on the sidewalk. Moving the papers over a concrete sidewalk was more complicated than sliding them on the smooth wood deck of the porch. I took a shortcut across the grass and pushed them to the gangway along the side of the house. I flipped them by squatting like a catcher, putting my hands under one corner of the stack, lifting straight up, and then pushing with my whole body. But after 4 or 5 rolls, I was no farther than the front corner of the house. The dim gangway ahead looked like a mile-long tunnel, so I took as many papers as the bag would hold. I should have thought of this earlier because if anyone saw me, it would look like I was delivering them, and I could sneak down the alley and hide the papers in the garbage cans. I began to untwist the wire, but my hands were sore from pushing the bundle around. Slam! My heart jumped. A car door shut out in the street. What if someone saw me? Furiously, I worked at the wire until it unraveled, then ran back to the porch for my bag. I tore back to the gangway and started stuffing. I carried the first load down the alley looking for empty garbage cans, and most were half full, which meant the garbage truck workers were hopefully picking up the garbage this morning. I was on my 3rd load, and all was going well, when I heard a voice near Mrs. Douglas's house. I looked for a place to hide, and saw a spot across the alley between a garage and a can, and I made it just in time. The gate swung open, and I saw Mrs. Douglas looking around the alley. I thought she was looking right at me, and I dropped my breathing so she couldn't hear.
Penny! Where are you?
She inquired. Penny was her dog. Mrs. Douglas looked up and down the alley, closed the gate, and went back into her yard. I took a deep breath and crawled from behind the garbage can. It was no good. I'd have to hide the rest of the papers in our basement. Loading the rest of the papers in my bag, I left it outside and snuck back into the house to unlock the basement door. Then I brought the bag indoors and hid the load all over the basement, in drawers, under shelves, in any dark space where it was unlikely anyone would see them. That part of the mission accomplished, I looked for a place to hide until it was time for my route to be over. The old brown couch we played on was no good because it was too much in the open. I looked inside the knee hole of the old wooden desk under a window, and it was dark, but I was used to it because I hid there playing hide and seek. I crawled into a spider web, and since there was no time to be squeamish, I wiped the web from my face, dragged the desk chair up to the desk for additional cover, and watched some mice scampering around. I heard the other kids talking in the kitchen, and I wished I was with them. When I heard pounding footsteps up the front porch, followed by a knock on the door. "Mom, there's a man here!" Joe yelled. I felt sick when I heard my mother's footsteps crossing the living room. Maybe it was Larry Creep coming to get me. I heard a muffled conversation and decided it was time to run. Bolting from underneath the desk, the mice and I scampered away together, and I flew up the basement stairs and ran through the backyard toward the alley. I went as far as the gate when I heard,
Jimmy, come here!
I stopped dead in my tracks. When I turned around, I saw my mother walking down the back steps with a man who was not Larry Creep.
This man is an inspector from the newspaper. His job is to ensure that all the papers are delivered.
He broke in. "What did you do with the newspapers?"
I put them in the garbage cans and in the basement.
"Show me," he ordered. The three of us walked down the alley, pulling newspapers out of the cans. "These are no good anymore. The newspapers are all dirty," the newspaper inspector said. We discovered more in the gangway. I'd been so panicked about hiding the papers that I'd forgotten to return for the last batch.
Can you get more, or can we still use these?
My mother asked. The newspaper inspector looked at his watch. "I can't get another delivery out here this late. Can I use your phone? I need to report this." We walked back into the house, and the newspaper inspector called his office. He hung up the phone and glared at me. "The boss says to save what we can and deliver as many as possible. We'll decide whether your son can keep his job later in the week." After the newspaper inspector left, Joe and I delivered the papers. When we got to Larry Creep's house, he wasn't there, and it was as if nothing had happened to me. At one point, Joe asked why I'd done it. I shrugged. I couldn't bring myself to say the real reason. I felt bad enough without him pounding on me or making fun.
I guess I don't want to have a paper route,
I said. When we returned from the delivery, my mother had convinced the newspaper inspector's boss that I would deliver the papers the right way and then sent me to the bedroom until my father came home. While I waited, all I could think about were the inspectors and monsters out there waiting to get me. I had a week to figure out another plan for ditching the route, and telling my parents what happened was out of the question. Even though we lived under the same roof, my parents were in their routines. My father worked in a factory, and my mom drank beer most nights after we went to bed. She told us she wasn't a morning person and said,
"Leave me alone,"
and let us get off to school, but we figured out that she was hungover. I guess there was anxiety with the kids, and she was having another baby. I asked her once,
"Why do you drink so much?"
Mom got angry and told me,
"I'm Irish. Drinking is my family tradition, and I don't stop for anyone."
my father had his problems too. He had been an only child and felt isolated most of the time. His father was a gambler, and his mother had walked out on them when he was young. He grew up believing his mother didn't love him, and that's why she left, which my grandfather reinforced in him. Dad didn't ask Mom to quit, most likely because he feared she would leave him, and he liked to drink too. Sober, my father was a quiet man. When drunk, he was vicious. Mom was the best woman he'd ever known, and Dad broke my brother's spirits one by one. When the next Wednesday came around, I decided to skip Larry Creep's part of the route, but I thought the newspaper inspector would squeal on me. Then it occurred to me that he might be nearby, and I could use his inspection to avoid Larry Creep. I stood at the corner staring at Larry's house and realized the newspaper inspector was not coming to my rescue, and no one was going to save me. So I took a deep breath, walked swiftly across the street, and flipped the paper onto Creep's concrete porch. As I hurried to the next house, I looked over my shoulder and saw Creep's white lace window draperies moving ever so slightly.